Inverted Man here. I'm going to be taking a look at a clip of Jordan Peterson's many talks. Then this particular clip was uploaded by a channel called ScienceNet. And usually they upload science, skeptical, atheist type videos. And here is like a counter example. Here's a video that is saying that we kind of need the idea of God. Maybe it's saying without God, where's morality? And so atheists will kind of like, they'll hear what they want to hear, and they won't really hear what he's saying. So I wanted to take a look at it and take it apart and talk about each individual piece and examine what it is what I think he's trying to get at and where the problems lie with what he says. Now, I would say, hey, go subscribe to ScienceNet. I would also say, go subscribe the bleep out of Jordan Peterson. You need to watch at least one of his lectures. It's going to take some time. You might have to take a break. That's fine. Come back to it. Think about it. Really think about it. It is just fantastic stuff. He's become infamous for his stance on freedom of speech. I wish he had become famous just because he's brilliant, but whatever. He's famous now, and it doesn't really matter why he's famous. I'm glad that I know about him because I think he's brilliant, and you should listen to some of the things he says. But even though I love the guy, I'm not always going to agree with him. And so I'm going to examine what he says here and explain what I think he's trying to get at. And we're going to get into metaphysics, which I don't like, but oh well. And we're going to be talking about transcendent things and ideas and what that means and all of that. So here we go.
In Dostoevsky's book Crime and Punishment, he has his main character, Raskolnikov, decides that he's going to commit a murder, and he has very good justification for the murder. And Dostoevsky's very good at this. He puts his characters into very difficult moral situations and gives them full justification for pursuing the pathway that they're pursuing. And so Raskolnikov, he's broke and starving. He wants to go to law school. His sister's about to prostitute herself, roughly speaking, by marrying a guy that hates her, that she hates, and he has contempt for her, at least acts in that manner. He's trying to rescue his mother as well, who's also in dire financial straits. He goes to a pawnbroker to pawn his meager possession so that he can continue to scrape by. And she has this niece, I believe it's her niece, that's not very bright, who she basically treats as a slave and is horrible to. And so the pawnbroker has this money. Raskolnikov is in dire need. He thinks, look, I'll just kill her, because why the hell not? I'll take her money. She's not doing any good with it anyways. I'll free her niece, who's just lurking as a slave. She's got all these other people tangled up in her pawnbroker schemes. All that'll happen is the world will be a better place. And the only thing that's holding me back is conventional moral cowardice. And, you know, Dostoevsky has his character in Crime and Punishment go through days, hours and days and weeks of intense imagination about this, rationalization about this, trying to justify himself, placing himself outside the law so that he can perpetrate this act, and telling himself with all the best nihilistic arguments that the only possible thing that could be holding him back is an arbitrary sense of indoctrinated morality. And so Dostoevsky explores that. He does commit the murder, and then of course all hell breaks loose because things don't necessarily turn out the way that you want. He gets away with it, however. Well, he gets away with it technically because no one knows he did it. But he doesn't get away with it in relationship to his own conscience.
When constructing a work of fantasy, a work of fiction, you can create any situation for your character that you want. In essence, it's a thought experiment of sorts, but it's a thought experiment that you're having the character that you invented go through. So they are faced with the dilemma of pulling the lever that will kill one person versus 100. And you can have them decide to kill the one person. And you can have them decide to kill the 100. And you can have them decide to kill all of them or do nothing or anything you want. because you're the author and you have total governorship over what plays out and how. And thought experiments on their own can be useful for deciding what sort of ethics you have. And a conversation about morality without including ethics, I always think, is somewhat moot, because ethics are the intellectual way that we have of grounding and understanding the morality that we find ourselves saddled with. And sure, the character can talk themselves into committing murder and then feel guilty despite it. The means justify the ends if the character is successful, but he's not completely, because he feels rotten and terrible about it. So the means kind of justify the ends, but not really. And it's a good story, but it's not reality. Why wouldn't we kill somebody if we absolutely knew we could get away with it? If we even took away the idea that we would feel guilty? If we knew that it was going to produce overwhelming good to do so? And that's a lot of knowledge that we're giving ourselves in this thought experiment. Well, it depends. If your ethics, like mine, say that the means do not and cannot justify the ends, then no matter what the good outcome might be, the negative action of taking away somebody's life isn't justified, period, because that's what the ethics require of you. Now, the morals there are then, well, no matter how good the outcome is and how pleasing that might be, the bad aspect of taking someone's life doesn't justify that, so I'm not going to do that. Even though I really want all that good stuff. And it seems like an awful shame that I'm giving up the opportunity to do all that. Maybe there's some other way to get all that good stuff, maybe not. But if I stick to my ethics and say the means don't justify the ends, then that's the end of that. And I might still feel guilty even despite that. So that, I think, is a more powerful kind of question. Why should I feel bad about not doing something bad? Well, because I knew that it was going to produce a lot of good. Well, what if I say forget my ethics? The means do justify the ends, at least this one time. Well, when else am I going to use that? And of course, in the thought experiment, I'm giving myself all sorts of special knowledge that I wouldn't have in reality. So in reality, there's never going to come a point when I'm going to know with that sort of level of certainty all the factors that would go into such a decision, and I absolutely know that it's going to be something I get away with legally and something I get away with morally and something that causes nothing but good. But, well, you said, well, if I got rid of the feeling, then why wouldn't I do it? Well, if the ethics would still be there even if I got rid of my emotions. So if my ethics say don't do it, then I don't do it, and that's the end of that. And maybe I wouldn't feel bad if I got rid of my emotions, so then that would work. The reason we don't kill someone, even if we believe doing that would be the greater good, is there is a convention that we know that means that somebody else can kill me. And when it is a situation of life and death, that is their life versus mine, well, we've already said that the rules are set aside. We've already decided that one of us will die. And, well, I don't want it to be me, so I'm going to make it be you. And you don't want it to be you, so you're going to try to make it be me. And whoever is better with their shot will win. Whoever is faster, whoever is luckier, or however you want to put it. And that's not a place we want to find ourselves in. So typically, and usually, we try to avoid circumstances where the only choice is to kill someone, because we don't want to ever be on the receiving end of somebody else having to think, well, the only choice I have is to kill them, because we don't want to die. And that's a properly basic idea of why we are opposed to killing others, because it is our own self-interest that we're interested in. And that's setting aside the huge evolution baggage that we have that's brought us to the point of thinking of others and the tribe as also an extension of the self, and that preserving them is also important. And this is why people throw themselves on grenades, because sacrificing yourself to save more is the greatest good that you could possibly do, even though you really don't want to die, but you really don't want all these people to die. And that's ingrained into you by the naturalistic morality that has come along due to evolution.
And so the rest of the book explores that. Well, Dostoevsky, I believe it was in Crime and Punishment, although he makes the same point in many of his books, he makes a very fundamental point, and this is the kind of point that I think that people who haven't investigated these matters down this particular literary and philosophical pathway never grapple with. Dostoevsky said straightforwardly, if there's no God, so if there's no higher value, let's say, if there's no transcendent value, then you can do whatever you want.
Okay, so there's a couple of things here. If this was an argument, Jordan Peterson would be guilty of attempting to poison the well, in a sense. People that haven't read this don't understand it. So, if you didn't understand where I'm coming from, well, then you're just undereducated. That's why you don't understand this. You haven't read this, or you haven't thought this through. Well, how in the world? And that's also special knowledge. How in the world do you know that? How do you know I haven't read it, or how do you know that I haven't thought it through? Well, I just think that that's the case. Well, maybe it is the case I haven't read it, but then that doesn't necessarily mean I haven't thought it through in a different way. Or maybe I haven't thought it through in this way, but does that invalidate the way that I have thought it through in a different way? And so all of that would combine to be a potential, if not outright, poisoning of the well. At very least, it would be muddying of the waters. But it's not a formalized debate, it's a lecture. So, okay. Well, what about that next part, that without some sort of transcendent idea, and it doesn't have to be God. I think that it should be clear. It says, let's say it's God or just some transcendent idea. That without that, you can do anything. Well, that's an appeal to consequence. Well, maybe it's true. So what? Well, Nietzsche, which he loves, explores that idea, and maybe explores that idea better than those that he'll be complaining about later. But, so what is my stance? Okay, so you can do anything. But should you do anything? There's a different question. Yes, we can do anything. And many times we do anything. Good, bad, and all the way in between. So, even if there is some sort of transcendent thing that we believe in, or that the entire world believes in, or that actually is, doesn't seem to affect the fact that we can and do the things that we ought not to do, or we don't do the things that we ought to do. So it doesn't seem to really matter that there's a transcendent idea or not. But, so what if the world stops having this transcendent idea? Then all morality just completely falls apart. Well, maybe. Or maybe it falls back to what the ethics are, and that depends on what your ethics are built on. So if your ethics are built on the idea of needing a transcendent idea, whatever it means to have a transcendent idea, then yes, your ethics will fall apart. But that doesn't mean that all ethics will be destroyed. Just that those systems of ethics would necessarily be removed. So for a while there might be chaos and there might be disorder, but there will be order in other places, maybe small pockets of it, but nonetheless order. Or maybe you say it's still not preferable. I still don't want to go down that path because I have aversion to disorder of any kind. I just don't want to risk it. It seems too risky. Okay, then the transcendent thing doesn't have to be God, right? Well, yeah, it doesn't. But we need something. And maybe you want to say, well, it's just the way that things are. And we can't change human nature, so even if it's totally a lie that this thing is transcendent, the consequences are just too dire. And yes, it's a logical fallacy, but we don't want the consequences, so we have to submit to that logical fallacy. Well, I don't want to. I want to find a different, better way to do it that doesn't rely on logical fallacy, that doesn't rely on saying that something's transcendent when it isn't really transcendent. And I want to find a way to change people's minds on that idea. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen all at once. It's a slow change throughout time. It is the process of evolution. So, where I would argue that the proper basis of ethics is grounded in naturalistic ideas, and that we don't need this word transcendent. We don't need that label to adhere to get our ethics. Jordan might think that, well, but a lot of people do. Well, right now you're right, but maybe I can change their mind over time. Maybe not me alone, but you know, the skeptics and atheists and agnostics and those that just don't believe in these transcendent things, that over time will let go of them. But I think that Jordan's real issue isn't with the words, but with something else instead.
And that's the question that he's investigating. And you see, this is why I have such frustration, say, with people like Sam Harris, the sort of radical atheists, because they seem to think that once human beings abandon their grounding in the transcendent, that the plausible way forward is with a kind of purist rationality that automatically attributes to other people equivalent value. It's like, I just don't understand that. They believe that that's the rational pathway.
And here is where the problem lies. Jordan Peterson just doesn't understand this. Now, he references Sam Harris specifically. He had a discussion debate with Sam Harris on certain aspects, and one of these days maybe I'll have to look at that and really analyze it. And it'll take me some time and energy to do so because there's a lot to unpackage there. But you don't understand it, Jordan Peterson. So with all due respect, any argument you make is an argument of ignorance. You need to understand this to express the view that you want to express, right? Didn't you say that earlier, that if you don't read these books, you don't understand these things? See, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. But I think that even if you don't understand it, you can still speak about it, because I don't agree with the idea that if you didn't read X, Y, and Z, or you didn't, you can still speak on those issues. You might not know as much, you might not know anything at all, but that doesn't disqualify your ability to to speak on it, and as you speak, you're learning because you're listening, and hopefully you're listening, and you're listening to the other person, you're learning from them, and you're saying, well, I thought that this was true. No, it's not the case. That's not true. Oh, really? Well, can you show me that? Yes, I can. Here you go. Oh, I didn't know that. I learned something new. And Jordan is all in favor of that sort of learning. So I think that the fact that he doesn't understand this is where this problem comes about. And it's not this instantaneous change, and I don't know that Jordan thinks that it is here. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but if we let go of God, or as Jordan said, this transcendent ideal, then what? What happens next? Do we just gravitate towards this other ideal that, of humanity? Is that the new transcendent thing? Does that happen automatically, or do we have to force it? And because I don't understand it, I don't know what to think about it. And because I don't know what to think about it, all I can do is talk about what I do know about, as I kind of complain about that I don't really get this. I don't get this concept. I don't see how it could work. And so we're going to hear more about how Jordan doesn't really get it in a moment here.
What the hell is irrational about me getting exactly what I want from every one of you whenever I want it at every possible second? Why is that irrational? And how possibly is that more irrational than us cooperating so we can both have a good time of it? I don't understand that.
Right. And that's why you're having a problem with it, because you don't understand it. So work to understand it.
I mean, it's as if the psychopathic tendency is irrational. There's nothing irrational about it. It's pure naked self-interest. How is that irrational?
It's somewhat of a weird question to ask, because I can't tell if it's a meaningless question, a loaded question, or just a completely pointless, redundant question, or if it's a question meant to cause us to think, or if it's just a question that he is throwing out there into the space to see what happens with it and see what kind of answer he gets. Now, I doubt very much that he will ever watch this video or listen to what I have to say on the matter, although if he did, I don't know, it'd be great. I'd love the guy. But I would say that you're potentially creating, again, a straw man here with this question. And I don't know that that's the way to look at it. But if we're looking at things in a rational way, there is an answer to this dilemma, if it is even a dilemma. Why would I not just serve myself and no one else ever, right? Or why wouldn't I just, take advantage whenever I can? Well, you could do that for a while, but then it becomes socially disadvantageous for you to do so, because others will see that you're doing that, or they'll find out, and so the group will begin to shun you, and so it will become increasingly more difficult to take advantage of people in that way, or to use people in that way. Now, you might make a successful run of it. You might make a successful life out of, being a con artist or a scam artist and going from place to place. But you would always have to move, because as soon as enough people learned about it, you would be shunned from that community. And depending on whether or not you're breaking laws, well, then you have another problem to worry about. And the nomadic tribes that we had way back, predating at least the religions that we're familiar with. I suppose there might have been religions back then. There's indications that has been in our past, so maybe we can never get away from that. But nonetheless, the sort of societies that we have are tribalistic. And so taking advantage of somebody, or as many somebodies as you can, makes you a lone wolf. And a lone wolf has a less likely chance of survival than somebody that works with the group, whatever that group might be. And you can't form a group of lone wolves because they'll all just take advantage of each other and tear each other apart. So that won't work either. So survival is what makes it rational. It does not do me good in the long run to do the strategy of taking advantage of anybody at any time whenever I can, even if I think I can get away with it, because I might not get away with it, and the risk and or reward of it is a high gamble, as Jordan might say. The it's a gambling move to make, and I might win, but if I lose, that's it. It's done. It's over. So you could look at, say, the Ponzi scheme, and here's somebody that got away with it for quite some time, and then that was it. When it finally caught up to him, well, then that was the end of it, and he's gone, and he's out of society, and he's ruined, and nobody would ever trust that person again. And that's the way it must be, because we've seen that lone wolf strategy just doesn't pay off in the long run, because the lone wolf has to interact with the group in order to enact the taking advantage of them, and then the group will turn on the lone wolf and destroy the lone wolf. So that's what makes it irrational. That's what makes it more rational to cooperate.
I don't understand that. Where's the pathway from rationality to an egalitarian virtue? Why the hell not every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost? It's a perfectly coherent philosophy. And it's actually one that you can institute in the world with a fair bit of material success if you want to do it. So I don't see. To me, I think that the universe that people like Dawkins and Harris inhabit is so intensely conditioned by mythological presuppositions that they take for granted the ethic that emerges out of that as if it's just a given, a rational given. And this, of course, precisely not Nietzsche's observation as well as Dostoevsky's. That's Nietzsche's observation. You don't get it. The ethic that you think is normative is a consequence of its nesting inside this tremendously lengthy history, much of which was expressed in mythological formulation. You wipe that out. You don't get to keep all the presuppositions and just assume that they're rationally axiomatic. To make a rational argument, you have to start with an initial proposition.
Well, I agree that you ought to start with a rational proposition to make a rational argument. Otherwise, you wind up with an illogical argument that one has to be skeptical of. But that's not really the problem. The problem, I think, comes with, well, we're just taking these things to be true without the religion. And you're doing what many others have done. In essence, you're saying you're borrowing from my worldview in order to justify yours. And you can't do that. It's all or nothing. You have to have all of it. No, I don't. Well, but then where does it come from? Who cares? I don't know. It comes from evolution. That's where morality comes from. And ethics came at some point because we wanted to have a intellectual way to think about morals. And I'm just somewhat sad to not hear the talking about ethics, because that is the intellectual way of looking at morality. The different systems of ethics that are out there, and there's lots of different systems. The one that I know of is utilitarian ethics, but there's other ones. You have the non-ethical system, like you have divine command theory. Well, that's not ethics. That is a rule set that you must follow. And yes, you can do it, but I don't know that I would call it morality, because you're doing it because you're told to, not because you believe that it will do the greater good, or maybe you've been told that it will do the greater good, but you don't have any other basis than being told that that's the way to do it than to do it. But okay, that's kind of a separate issue. I find myself listening to I don't understand, followed by, and here's my complaint about the thing that I don't understand. And even within that is the misunderstandings that the skeptics, atheists that have done this sort of thing online or off long enough that we've seen or heard this before, where somebody will say, without God, how do you possibly justify morality? What if I don't even have to? Why should I? What's it matter if I can justify something or not? Well, I want a rational argument. Well, that's a different topic. But why does it matter if I can justify it or not? Who cares? Well, then you don't have a rational basis for it. So what? Neither do you. 2Q. We're in the same boat. So what? But if either one works, then why pick one over the other? Well, then I need to show you that one works better, right? Well, okay, you want a rational basis for some sort of argument. Okay. We are evolved creatures. Jordan doesn't disagree with that. I'm fairly certain of that. And morality and ethics have evolved with us. Pretty sure that he wouldn't disagree with that. Don't know for sure. I'd hope so. So there's your rational basis for where all this came from. And the fact that we, at some point in time, or perhaps for all time, called upon gods, spirits, demons, devils, souls, or whatever to justify our morality and or ethics is irrelevant, because we can have a different word or idea for that. And I think that's really what Jordan is kind of coming to in this next bit here. Because he says, you have to replace the thing with something else. And so because he doesn't quite comprehend what it is that's being offered as a replacement for God, he doesn't comprehend the something else that's being replaced. And so it seems to him that there's nothing filling that gap. And so without God, what do we have? We have nothing. Well, no, that's not true. But I understand how many people can think that that's the case, because perhaps they haven't thought through it. But perhaps they have. But they got to the wrong conclusion. Who knows? Which is me doing a callback to earlier that I complained when he did that. See what I just did there is I just said a thing like he said, but it's okay when I say it. Because reasons, never mind. Okay, next clip.
Well, the proposition that underlies Western culture is that there's a transcendent morality. Now, you could say that's a transcendent morality instantiated in the figure of God. That's fine. You could even call that a personification of the morality. If you don't want to move into a metaphysical space, I'm not arguing for the existence of God. I'm arguing that the ethic that drives our culture is predicated on the idea of God, and that you can't just take that idea away and expect the thing to remain intact mid-air without any foundational support.
And that is the entirety of the clip uploaded by ScienceNet, and they didn't mention where this lecture comes from, ScienceNet, so I don't know where to get the rest of this talk, because I want to listen to all of it. So anyways, well, yeah, you do replace it with something else, and I don't know what Sam Harris or Dawkins or any of those guys are suggesting. All I can speak is my own stuff, because atheism and atheist doesn't mean anything more than we just don't believe in God, and probably supernatural stuff, but not necessarily. So it's just kind of a weird term that we have. Skeptic, on the other hand, means a little bit more than that. So, as a skeptic, I can, again, only speak for myself, because there isn't a solid way of doing that necessarily either. But I find that morals and ethics are grounded in the very mundane nature of humanity, that we evolved as a group species, relying on each other to lift up those that were weaker and carry them rather than letting them perish. And doing so, we found, had an advantageous position than not doing so. The tribe that took care of its elder had access to history that the other tribe didn't. And that access to history gave them an advantage. And later that idea changed and morphed throughout time. Because, well, now we have records of history, so why do we keep old people around? Well, because we cherish our elderly, typically speaking. And there is some innate value that we place on human life. But also quality of life has to be there too. And as things continue to change, we too will have to change with it. And the ability that we have to manipulate our environment is now the ability that we have to manipulate the environment's way of interacting back with us. And we're getting into AI stuff there, where the thing that we made now can be as smart, if not smarter than us, and potentially be the next species that wipes us out if we're not careful. Whoa, what do we do then? I don't know. But that doesn't require any sort of grounding in metaphysics or the supernatural or the divine or anything like that, because we can have a properly basic mundane grounding. And certainly it's not going to happen overnight or be a broad change throughout society. I suspect that we will carry ideas of God with us for as long as humanity exists. The type of gods will change. The way that we look at it or think about it. Maybe the terms will change. But because of the way the human brain is, it will take a long, long time for that to evolve away from being something that we need, if indeed we can ever evolve away from it at all. And then maybe on that day that we certainly won't be around to see, then we will have nothing but mundane expressions of morality and ethics. Now, is that any better or worse than the supernatural ones? I can only say that people that do bad in the name of God, to me, are more offensive that do bad because they are wanting to do it. That they don't try to justify their actions by saying that they have some sort of divine right to. So yeah, the problem might remain, that people will still do awful, terrible things. All I really want is to remove one thing that they can say, well, it's not really me, I'm not really doing this bad thing, I'm just doing what God wants me to do, so it's not really my fault. I just want them to have to take accountability for their own actions and say, yes, I am killing this person because I hate that person and I want them to die. Or I'm doing X, Y, and Z because it's me and not because I thought some God wanted me to. Or, hey, I'm doing it because the government wanted me to. Well, then we have a different thing where somebody can shoulder off their responsibility to some other thing, but at least I know that government exists. And I can wipe out that government and say, well, now what? Now you have no excuse to do the bad, do you? And if they continue doing bad, well, now I know that it's just them, and they, too, know that it's just them. But I can't necessarily do all of those things, but what I can perhaps do is remove this particular one thing that people can call upon and say, that's my excuse for doing this bad thing. And you might say, well, but it also removes their excuse for doing something good. Well, I'd rather people do good because they want to, not because they think that their God is telling them to, even though the outcome is the same. I would just rather people do good because it is good to do good. But that's my position on that particular issue. I think that the problem here is that Jordan just doesn't understand the arguments being made by the so-called opposition. Radical atheists? Really? Sam Harris is radical? I don't even know what that means, but okay, whatever. If Jordan Peterson somehow hears any of this, I would want to say to him, thank you for all I've learned from you. It is my humble hope that you learn something from me. Become a pleasing Patreon and have me perhaps read your name. Jacob Smith, Joseph Santos, Hector W. Lester, Robert Defendi, and William McTray, who got his name read right, and all the other ones got their names switched around. Don't know what happened there. I'm a better edit.